The 15th floor conference room of Blake & Rowe was a pressure cooker. 11 of the firm's top lawyers graduates of Harvard, Yale, Columbia argued over each other in sharp, anxious tones. Legal terms flew like darts. Fingers pointed, tempers flared. And at the head of the table, Nathan Blake sat in silence, his jaw clenched and hands steepled, eyes locked on the whiteboard where Clause 38B was scrawled in bold red ink. It was the sticking point in a $60 million merger agreement with the Renshaw Group. And unless someone found a way around it, the entire deal would collapse, taking the firm's reputation with it. Then, without warning, the door opened. No one looked up. It wasn't a senior partner. It wasn't a consultant flown in to save the day. It was Emily Carter, the janitor. She wore a faded Garfield t-shirt, jeans that had seen better years, and her hair was tied back in a loose ponytail. She pushed a squeaky cleaning cart into the room, headed straight for a corner where someone had knocked over a glass of water earlier. To the room full of million-dollar minds and tailored suits, she was background noise until she wasn't. Emily knelt in the corner, mop in hand, quietly soaking up the mess while the chaos raged overhead. But her eyes, sharp and observant, drifted upward. She wasn't trying to eavesdrop, not really. But the contract clause on the board, it wasn't gibberish to her. Section 14, Article 127. She'd seen those before. In the dog-eared legal books on her nightstand, the ones she read late at night after her son fell asleep. Books given to her by a retired law professor who once said, "You don't need a degree to understand justice. You just need curiosity and a damn good memory. That clause doesn't look airtight," she said casually. Her voice soft but clear, like she was talking to herself, but not really. "It's a structural flaw." Written backward from Article 127. The room froze, dead silent. 11 heads turned. So did Nathan's. For a second, no one said anything. Then, as if waking from a spell, one lawyer scoffed. "Excuse me." Emily didn't flinch. She stood still, holding the mop, and nodded toward the board. Clause 38B. It's built on a conditional structure in Section 14, but it directly contradicts the logic of Article 127. That creates interpretive ambiguity. Garvin v. Dakota Energy 2019 is a pretty close match. Nathan stepped away from the table. "How do you know that?" he asked, voice low, somewhere between curiosity and disbelief. Emily met his gaze. "I read it. At home. Civil and contract law volumes. I've got a full set. A professor from my old neighborhood gave them to me after I dropped out of law school. I read one chapter every night after my kids in bed." One of the junior attorneys let out a derisive chuckle. Another said, "With all due respect, this is a professional setting." Emily smiled, unfazed. "And was anything I said incorrect? Or is it just my uniform that's the problem? Because if that's all, I've got a blazer at home. Bought it by mistake. Thought it was a hoodie." Nathan blinked, taking her in. Really taking her in for the first time. Not just as a cleaning staff member, but as a puzzle he hadn't figured out. "You studied law?" he asked. 3 years, she replied. 1 year from graduating. Then life happened. Work became more urgent than lectures. Rent doesn't wait. Babies don't feed themselves. But I kept studying. Just not for a diploma. The lawyers around the table were silent now. Not out of respect necessarily, but out of stunned curiosity. Like they were watching something that defied every assumption they'd ever made about worth and title. Nathan walked closer. "Repeat what you said about Clause 38B in detail." Emily leaned her mop against the wall and stepped forward. She spoke with calm authority, outlining the structure of the clause, identifying its misalignment with federal code, and explaining how ambiguity could invalidate it. She cited the Garvin precedent, described its application, and suggested a stronger counter-argument than the one the firm's legal team had been tossing around for hours. Her voice didn't rise. She didn't stumble. It was as though she belonged at the head of the table all along. "You read Garvin v. Dakota?" Nathan asked, genuinely stunned. "Twice," Emily said. The defense's argument was solid, but the closing quote was weak. "I would have used Morgan v. Shellbridge instead. Hits harder, more relevant to contract ambiguity." One of the Ivy League partners shifted uncomfortably in his chair. Another cleared his throat, but no one challenged her. They couldn't. She wasn't making guesses, she was rewriting their entire argument in real time with nothing but memory and passion. You know, one lawyer muttered, desperate to cling to hierarchy. "You're not authorized to act as counsel." Emily nodded, calm as ever. "I know. I'm not signing anything or representing anyone. I'm just thinking out loud. Still legal, last I checked." Nathan's lips curled slightly. Something between a smirk and admiration. He turned back to the rest of the room. "Meeting's over," he said. "I'll take it from here." The room hesitated, then slowly cleared out, lawyers gathering their files with stunned, unsettled glances at the woman with the mop. Emily picked up her bucket and wheeled her cart out into the hallway, heart racing beneath her t-shirt. She wasn't sure if she'd just been promoted, reprimanded, or something in between. But as she pushed her cart back toward the janitor's closet, one thought shimmered beneath the adrenaline. For the first time in years, someone had seen her not as a service worker, not as a single mom, not as someone who dropped out of school, but as a mind worth listening to. And in the world of law, that was the most powerful clause of all. Nathan Blake's office didn't look like the kind of place where life changed. It was cold, minimalist, surgical white walls, a sleek black desk, not a single photograph in sight. But that day, it became the setting for something unexpected. Emily Carter stood in the doorway, unsure if she was meant to walk in or wait for security to escort her out. She'd never been called into a CEO's office before, especially not while still holding a mop handle in one hand and a bucket in the other. Nathan stood by the window, tablet in hand, not looking at her yet. When he finally turned, his voice was steady, almost soft. "Close the door, please." Emily left the cleaning cart outside. She didn't know why, but it felt wrong to roll it in there. Maybe it was the silence. Maybe it was the way Nathan was watching her, not like a CEO studying an employee, but like a mathematician staring at an unsolvable equation. He pointed to the chair across from his desk. "Sit." She did, awkwardly adjusting the Garfield t-shirt that now felt wildly inappropriate. "This," he said, holding up the tablet, "is a clause used in a recent Florida energy merger. One of my senior partners thinks it could help us. What's your take?" No preamble, no small talk, just war served cold. Emily took the tablet, read quickly, her eyes skimming over the sea of legalese with the ease of someone fluent in a language others find cryptic. She handed it back and said, "It's garbage." Nathan blinked. "Excuse me?" She leaned forward, unbothered. "It's a smokescreen, 5 subjunctives, 2 passive ambiguities. It hides the real issue in dense language. If I were a judge, I'd toss it for intentional obfuscation." Nathan raised an eyebrow. "That's a strong take." Emily smiled. "So is bad coffee. Doesn't mean it's good." He walked back to his desk and opened another document. "This one's about asset protection in case of unilateral termination." Emily read it, shook her head. "They've lost with that clause before. Rowan v. Palms, Trading 2021. Violated the good faith principle. The judge shredded it." Nathan narrowed his eyes. 3 of my most experienced lawyers approved that wording. Then maybe they read too many boilerplates and not enough court transcripts." She replied, cool, but not cruel. There was no arrogance in her tone, only certainty earned through quiet, persistent learning. Nathan exhaled, sat on the edge of his desk. For the first time, he didn't look like the man in charge. He looked like someone trying to recalibrate his worldview. "How do you remember all this?" he asked. "I read out loud," Emily said simply. "My 6-year-old thinks jurisprudence is a superhero. He says Mom read me the chapter where the bad contract gets defeated." Nathan laughed, a short, real, unscripted laugh. "You're not what I expected." "I get that a lot," Emily said, shrugging. He handed her a blue folder. "This is the Renshaw contract. If Clause 38B falls, the whole agreement unravels. It'll cost us everything." Emily opened the folder, flipped through pages with methodical focus. "You missed a safeguard clause in the closing section," she said finally. "Any decent attorney would have flagged that. But sometimes pride edits out caution." Nathan looked offended. "Are you saying my legal team is careless? I'm saying sometimes they're too clever for their own good. Contracts should protect, not perform." He looked at her then, not through her, but into her. You studied law, but you didn't finish. She nodded. 3.5 years. I was good, top of my class, loved it, but I had to choose degree or diapers. Nathan didn't speak, just listened. Really listened. My ex left when I was pregnant, said he wasn't ready to be a father. I told him I'd manage, and I did. I cleaned offices during the day and read case law at night. I couldn't afford to finish law school, but I never stopped learning. There was no self-pity in her voice, just fact. Lived experience distilled into resilience. Nathan turned to the window. You know you can't practice without a license. I'm not asking to practice, Emily said. I'm not signing briefs or billing hours. I think. I observe. I offer insights. That's still legal, right? He smiled despite himself. Barely. Then let me be barely useful, she said. You don't need another suit with a degree. You need someone who remembers what justice is supposed to feel like. Nathan turned back to her, something changing in his posture, a decision forming still unspoken. No one can know, he said finally. If people find out I'm taking legal advice from a janitor, there'll be headlines, Emily finished. And a scandal. And questions. I get it. So, he said slowly, would you be willing to stay unofficial? She stood, picked up her bucket. Sure, she said, with a crooked grin. As long as I don't have to wear heels, my sneakers do just fine. That was the day it started, quietly off the record in the space between lines and loopholes. Emily Carter, the janitor in the Garfield shirt, became the ghostwriter of Blake and Rowe's most airtight contracts. And Nathan Blake, for the first time in his life, learned that the most valuable mind in the room sometimes enters with a mop and leaves with a law firm in her pocket. Emily Carter didn't get a corner office. She didn't even get a key card. Officially, she was still facility support administrative floor. But starting that Tuesday, things quietly shifted. Instead of pushing her mop straight down the corridor, she made a subtle left toward the executive wing. Tucked in her supply cart between the bleach and microfiber cloths was a black leather notebook. Inside it, the names of each partner scribbled shorthand for every legal term she overheard, and a growing list of questions that popped into her head while scrubbing baseboards. It was a war journal, and Emily was waging a silent battle from the janitor's closet. Nathan Blake kept his promise. No official title, no email address, no office door with her name on it. But every morning there was something waiting for her. A draft clause slipped beneath the coffee machine, a legal memo left beside the recycling bin, a redacted contract left inside a manila envelope marked supplies. She would read them while wiping windows or dusting the picture frames no one ever looked at. Then she'd jot her thoughts on Post-its or torn notebook pages and leave them in obscure but intentional places, taped under a mug, wedged inside the second drawer of the intern station, slipped into Nathan's daily folder like a phantom whisper. It didn't take long for results to show. Meetings started running shorter. Legal disputes that once took weeks to resolve began folding in days. Attorneys stopped arguing as much because there were suddenly fewer mistakes to argue about. Nathan said little but observed everything. He watched how junior lawyers started muttering, maybe we should double-check that interpretation instead of storming in with baseless confidence. It was like someone had sprayed clarity into the air, but no one knew who was behind it. That was the point. On the third day, a senior associate left a sticky note outside Nathan's office. Does the cross-compensation clause apply to outsourced services? The next morning, a folded napkin was waiting at the break room table, only if explicitly stated. Otherwise, watch Article 92B. The writing was neat, unmistakably female, sharp as a scalpel. Someone tried asking Nathan directly, but he simply raised an eyebrow and said, "Work with what you're given." Whispers began. It's like we have a ghost in the firm. A legal guardian angel. Who the hell is writing these? Emily kept her head down. When people looked, she was the same as ever, wiping fingerprints off glass, emptying waste bins. But beneath that still exterior, she was tracking the firm's intellectual current like a weather balloon measuring wind patterns. She watched who respected clients and who faked it. She noticed which lawyers cited the law for truth and which did it for ego. She read every email Nathan forwarded with an eye for hidden bias and silent assumptions. And sometimes she answered with a sentence so well aimed it silenced the whole floor. Nathan, for his part, grew dependent in a way that unsettled him. He wasn't used to quiet brilliance. He was used to credentials and click-clacking heels and resumes stacked on mahogany desks. But Emily challenged that. She didn't demand attention, she earned it in silence. She didn't need recognition, just results. And more than once, when Nathan was standing before the board presenting a seamless argument, he realized he was quoting a line she had scribbled next to the microwave on a napkin covered in coffee rings. It couldn't last forever. One Friday morning, Emily was typing quietly on Nathan's laptop while he was on a call. A legal brief needed rewording urgently. She wasn't logged in. She wasn't supposed to be there. But she was fixing what 3 trained lawyers couldn't. That was when Alexander Rios, young, brilliant, arrogant, walked in and froze. "What the hell are you doing?" he demanded. Emily looked up calmly, tightening the reversibility clause in the merger brief. "You're not even allowed to use that computer," he shouted. "You're a janitor." Emily didn't raise her voice. Anyone can read the law, but understanding its soul takes more than a title. Alexander blinked. "That's not in the code." "No," she replied. "It's in the preface of Professor Marchese's contract series. Same one you quote in your lectures, right?" His mouth opened, then closed. She left without another word, leaving the screen open behind her with a note. Changed phrasing to avoid conditional ambiguity. "You're welcome." Nathan returned 10 minutes later, found the room buzzing, the air heavy with something unspoken. But he didn't ask. He already knew. From that day forward, no one questioned the mysterious notes. They started calling her the voice in the footnotes. Rumors swirled. Some thought she was a secret consultant hired by the board. Others whispered she was an ex-judge working undercover. Nathan said nothing. Emily said less. But her influence expanded. The firm moved faster. Errors dropped. Clients praised the sudden clarity in communication. And deep down, Nathan knew she wasn't just saving his reputation. She was rebuilding the way the firm thought about law. Emily never claimed credit. She kept cleaning. She kept watching. And every night she'd walk home to her son carrying not just her old backpack and notebook, but something more powerful, proof that you didn't need a title to matter. Just knowledge, courage, and the discipline to keep showing up even when no one sees you. Especially then. The morning began like any other. Emily Carter arrived before most of the staff, letting herself into the building with the quiet confidence of someone who knew every hallway by heart. The city outside was still stretching its limbs, but inside the offices of Blake and Rowe were already humming with a low, anticipatory energy. Emily headed straight to Nathan's office, as she had the past several mornings, to finalize revisions on a brief he had asked her to review. The computer was already on the document open. She sat in his chair, not with arrogance, but with a sense of purpose, and began typing. Her notes were precise, her edits clean. She didn't hear the footsteps in the hall. She didn't sense the shift in air until it was too late. The door creaked open behind her. "What the hell are you doing?" The voice was sharp, accusing, and instantly recognizable. Alexander Rios stood in the doorway, eyes wide with disbelief and the kind of fury that came from bruised pride. Emily looked up, her fingers still on the keyboard. She didn't flinch. "I'm adjusting the language in the reversibility clause," she said plainly. It was vague. "You're not even allowed to touch that system," he snapped. "You're a janitor. You have no right, no authority, no clearance." His voice was loud now, echoing down the hallway, drawing attention. Emily stood calm. "Sometimes the people with the most access know the least," she replied evenly. "Sometimes the people with the least power see the most clearly." It didn't matter that she was right. It didn't matter that her version of the clause would later be praised for its clarity and effectiveness. In that moment, what mattered was optics. Emily behind the CEO's desk. Emily on the CEO's computer. Emily who cleaned the floors editing a document written by men in suits who'd never learned how to pick up a mop. Alexander stormed off, fury vibrating in every step. The storm had begun, and there would be no stopping it. By lunchtime, the whispers had become a chorus. In the elevator, 2 interns whispered behind their coffee cups. "Did you hear? She's not just the cleaner. I think she's like a secret lawyer, or maybe an imposter. On the mezzanine, a junior associate replayed the TikTok video Marcus had uploaded Emily leaning on a broom explaining contract law using popcorn, Netflix, and fake dog lovers. The clip had surpassed 2 million views. "This is her," he murmured. "The cleaning lady. She's a genius," someone replied. "Or a fraud," someone else countered. The office was divided, but no one was neutral anymore. Emily felt the shift like static in the air. The stares that lasted a second too long, the silence that followed her into rooms. Where once there had been invisibility, now there was scrutiny. She moved through the building as she always had, quiet, focused, but her steps were heavier, her breath slower. In her pocket, she kept the same black notebook. But now it felt heavier, as though the weight of being known had settled between its pages. She hadn't asked for attention. She'd only wanted to be useful, to matter. Meanwhile, the video was still spreading. Law students across the country were tagging their professors. Legal bloggers were dissecting her metaphors. Cable news anchors were calling it a viral moment of unexpected brilliance. But inside Blake and Rowe, the reaction was anything but celebratory. HR flagged the incident. Public relations panicked. Clients started calling with questions that sounded innocent but dripped with implication. Is she authorized? Does your firm outsource legal work to non-lawyers? Nathan Blake was pulled into meetings he didn't want to attend, forced to listen to colleagues speculate about Emily's role, her past, her intentions. When he finally saw her that afternoon, she was back in her uniform, wiping down the glass wall of a conference room. "We need to talk," he said quietly. She nodded, set the cloth down, and followed him into his office. For a moment, neither spoke. Then Nathan said, "Do you understand what's happening?" "I'm trending," she said flatly. "You're more than trending," he replied. "You're being investigated, watched, judged." Emily sat across from him, folded her hands. "So tell them the truth, that I studied law, that I didn't finish because I had to choose between tuition and formula, that I kept reading because I couldn't stand the idea of letting my mind go soft." Nathan rubbed his face. "You don't get it. This could be catastrophic for the firm, for you. People don't like mysteries. They don't trust what they can't label." Emily's eyes darkened, but her voice stayed calm. "Are you embarrassed by me?" He looked up, startled. "No." "Then why are you scared?" she asked. "Because I don't wear a suit. Because I don't have letters after my name. Because your Harvard grads are taking notes from the woman who refills their toilet paper." Nathan didn't answer. The silence between them was heavier than anything HR could write up. Emily stood. "I never asked for a spotlight. I never even wanted credit. I just wanted to use what I knew. To prove that being useful isn't tied to a diploma or a desk. If that's threatening to your team, maybe the problem isn't me." She walked to the door, paused. "And for what it's worth, if I had to choose again between staying invisible and helping anyway, I'd still choose the mop, and the claws, and the truth." She left without waiting for a response. Nathan sat alone, feeling like he had just lost something irreplaceable. Not a scandal, not a secret, but a voice he hadn't known he'd come to rely on. By the end of the day, Emily had returned to her cart, her notebook, her quiet rounds. But she wasn't the same. She couldn't be. She'd been seen, truly seen. And while some looked with suspicion, others somewhere in corners of the world she'd never stepped foot in were looking with awe, with inspiration. And as she cleaned the hallway one last time before leaving, a new post-it note waited on Nathan's door. It read, "When the world doesn't know where to put you, stand anyway." The moment Emily stepped into the building that Monday, she felt it. The air had changed. The receptionist, usually chatty, gave her a look halfway between pride and pity. At the security desk, someone whispered her name, not unkindly. But it was different now. No longer quiet admiration, no longer respectful silence. It was fame, or at least its sharp beginning. On the way to the elevator, a junior associate smiled awkwardly, phone in hand. "You've seen it right." Emily blinked. "Seen what?" He held up the screen. There she was, frozen mid-sentence, broom in hand, mid-explanation about popcorn and legal breaches. 4 million views. And climbing. By the time she reached the administrative floor, half the office had already watched the video. Marcus's TikTok had gone viral, picked up by legal blogs shared by professors, and even commented on by a celebrity judge from a popular courtroom reality show. The caption read, "Janitor explains contract law better than your Harvard professor." Pure brilliance. Emily wasn't sure whether to laugh or cry. She'd spent years invisible, and now, with a few analogies and a borrowed broom, the whole world was watching. In Nathan's office, the mood was anything but celebratory. He didn't even look up when she entered, just gestured toward the door. "Close it." She obeyed. He was holding a printed news article, "The Legal Whisperer, the Mystery Mind Behind Blake and Roe." Emily crossed her arms. "I didn't ask to be filmed." "Doesn't matter," Nathan replied, finally meeting her gaze. "It's out, and now the questions are coming in. From media, from clients, from the board." His voice was tight, as if he was trying not to accuse her of something he hadn't quite decided she'd done. "What questions?" she asked. "They want to know who you are, why you're here, why you, someone with no degree, no license, are giving legal advice that's shaping million-dollar cases." "I never gave advice," she said firmly. "I asked questions. I pointed out patterns. I offered insight." "You're the one who chose to listen." Nathan sighed, pinching the bridge of his nose. "It doesn't matter what it technically was. What matters is perception. This firm has a brand, a standard. This," he gestured to the article, "complicates that." Emily's expression didn't change, but her voice lost its softness. "Tell me something, Nathan. Are you embarrassed by me?" The question hung in the air like the final line in a courtroom summation. Nathan looked away. "No," he said almost too quickly. "Then what are you?" she pressed. "Afraid, ashamed. Do you think I've tainted your reputation just by being present?" "That's not what I said," he shot back. "No, but it's what you meant," she said, and there was no anger in her voice, just clarity, like someone who'd been forced to read between the lines her whole life. "I didn't film that video," she continued. "I didn't ask for views or praise or questions. I explained a concept because 2 interns were confused and no one else was helping them. And now that people are listening, you're scared." Nathan stood, fists clenched. "I'm scared this firm is going to become a headline, a meme. I'm scared of losing the trust we've spent years building." "Then maybe," she said, "you should ask why that trust is so fragile it can't handle a woman with a mop and a mind." The words hit hard. Not loud, not aggressive, but precise. Like a ruling handed down without flourish, only fact. Nathan didn't respond. He couldn't. Emily walked to the window, staring out at the city. "You know what's funny? I never wanted any of this. Not the attention, not the applause. I was fine being invisible as long as I could be useful. But now that I'm visible, suddenly everyone's uncomfortable. Maybe they should ask themselves why intelligence only matters to them when it comes in a suit." Nathan sat back down, deflated. "This is bigger than you," he said. "No," she corrected, turning to face him. "This is bigger than you. You're the one who made this complicated. I just did what I always do. Think, work, contribute. You're the one worried that people will realize how much you've relied on someone who wasn't supposed to be in the room." The silence between them was thick, painful. But underneath it, something was cracking. Not their alliance. Not even their trust. But Nathan's sense of control. His version of the world. Emily reached into her bag and pulled out a folded piece of paper. "This is the clause I edited this morning," she said, placing it on his desk. "It's cleaner. Tighter. I included the precedent you missed. You can use it. Or not. Either way, I'm going back to work." She turned to leave, then stopped. "And Nathan, I'm not ashamed of who I am. You shouldn't be either." Then she walked out, head-high steps, steady, heart bruised, but not broken. Because she knew no matter what they said, her value didn't come from being hidden. It came from being honest. That evening, Emily returned home, kicked off her shoes, and hugged her son tightly. He held up his tablet. "Mom, you're famous." She smiled. Not famous, just seen. And as she tucked him into bed, she whispered to herself what she had always believed. but never dared to say aloud. I don't need a title to matter. I just need the courage to keep showing up. And that courage no headline could take away. Nathan Blake had spent his entire career defining success by numbers, case wins, firm rankings, client portfolios, billable hours. He wore tailored suits, used words like deliverables, and shook hands with men who had marble floors in their penthouses. He'd been raised to believe that power came from pedigree, not perspective. But ever since Emily Carter walked into his office with nothing but a mop and a mind sharper than most of his legal team, something inside him had shifted subtly, then irreversibly. It wasn't just the way she thought, it was how she saw. She didn't scan a clause looking for angles to exploit. She read between the lines like she was trying to understand the people who had written it. One morning, he handed her a client dispute document expecting a simple summary. Instead, she returned it with handwritten notes that didn't just dissect the legal flaw, but highlighted the emotional undertone in the client's original intent. They're not just protecting the asset she'd written, they're afraid of legacy loss. Nathan read the line 3 times, feeling something he rarely felt in law: humility. Over time, he began to notice her rhythms, how she always paused before she spoke, like she was weighing not just what to say, but how it would land, how she never interrupted, how she listened with her entire body as if absorbing more than just sound. She was gentle, but never passive, firm, but never arrogant. She didn't need to raise her voice to command attention. Her words carried weight because she didn't use them carelessly. One afternoon, they stood side by side in the firm's library, surrounded by shelves he hadn't touched in years. He watched as she pulled out a worn book, its spine barely hanging on. "This was my favorite," she said, flipping through pages annotated in multiple colors. "I used to study cases the way some people study poetry. There's a rhythm to arguments if you listen closely enough." Nathan watched her fingers trace a sentence with reverence. For the first time, he didn't see her as a resource. He saw her as a woman, as a force. And it terrified him. That night, he couldn't focus. He reread emails twice, burned dinner, poured himself a glass of whiskey, and stared out the window of his luxury condo, wondering how someone with no diploma, no designer wardrobe, no formal standing could have cracked his world open so completely. She'd never once tried to impress him, and maybe that's why she had. The next morning, they rode the elevator together, a silent moment that pulsed with energy. She held her notebook. He held his coffee. Their arms brushed lightly. Neither spoke. But when the doors opened, Nathan hesitated. "You ever think about finishing?" he asked. "Law school, I mean." Emily turned to him, surprised. "Every day," she said softly, "but thinking doesn't pay tuition." He nodded, then blurted, "If you ever wanted to, I could help, sponsor it, quietly." She stared at him, eyes wide, not with gratitude, but with something closer to wariness. "Why?" she asked. "Because I think the world's better when your mind is in the room," he said. "And maybe I want to be the kind of man who recognizes that." Later that week, they found themselves in a client meeting together. Nathan had invited her unofficially. She sat in the back, quiet, observing. When the conversation stalled over an ambiguous clause, she gently cleared her throat and offered an interpretation that stunned the room into silence. The client, a tough, seasoned businessman, nodded slowly. "Smart," he said. "Who is she?" Nathan smiled. "The reason we're still in business." After the meeting, Emily pulled him aside. "You shouldn't have put me on the spot like that," she said, though there was no anger in her voice, just caution. "They'll start asking questions." "Let them," Nathan said. "Let them wonder how a woman with no degree managed to outthink a room full of suits. That kind of wonder might change things." Emily stared at him. "You're not the man I thought you were when we met." "Neither are you," he said, "and thank God for that." That night, Nathan couldn't sleep. He kept replaying her words, her courage, the way she spoke truth, even when it made people uncomfortable. He thought about the clients he'd impressed, the judges he'd charmed, and how none of them made him feel what he felt when Emily looked at him as if she could see past the polish and into whatever parts he tried to keep hidden. He realized with a mix of awe and fear that he didn't just respect her, he admired her, maybe more than anyone he'd ever known. Emily had changed him not by force, but by presence, by being everything the system didn't account for. She hadn't asked to be seen, but now he couldn't look away. She was teaching him what strength really looked like, not the kind that came with power, but the kind that came from living with integrity when no one's watching. And in that realization, Nathan Blake, a man who had always prided himself on being untouchable, finally understood what it meant to be moved. The office always felt different after dark, less a place of business, and more a cathedral of silence, filled with unfinished thoughts and whispers echoing off glass walls. That evening, Emily was still in the conference room long after everyone else had gone. She stood barefoot, heels abandoned, under the table, rubbing her temples as she reviewed the final language on a revised settlement draft. Nathan watched from the doorway, suit jacket slung over his shoulder, tie loosened, eyes softer than usual. There was no noise between them, just the soft hum of the city below and something heavier in the air, like the moment before a storm or before a confession. "You haven't eaten," he said. She didn't turn. "Neither have you." He stepped in, offering a half-wrapped sandwich. "I figured you wouldn't stop to feed yourself, so I brought options." Emily took it slowly, not because she was hungry, but because the gesture meant more than she wanted to admit. "You don't have to take care of me," she said. "Maybe I want to," he replied. That made her look up, their eyes locked. The room felt too small for how loud her heart started beating. "You're not the man I thought you were," she said quietly. "The first time I saw you, I thought another executive with a steel spine and a frozen smile." Nathan smiled gently, and now Emily hesitated. "Now I think you feel more than you let on, and that terrifies you." He took a step closer. "It does," he admitted, "but not because of what I feel for you. It's because I don't know how to feel it without breaking everything I've built." Her breath caught. This wasn't a conversation between a CEO and a janitor. This was a man and a woman standing on the edge of something neither of them had a map for. He reached for her hand. She let him. Their fingers interlocked like puzzle pieces that had been waiting years to find each other. "You've changed how I see everything, Emily," he said. "The way I run this firm, the way I measure value, the way I understand people." She swallowed hard. "Nathan, I didn't come here to be someone's revelation. I came here because I didn't want to waste what I know. Because I was tired of hiding. But I can't be someone you love in the shadows." Her voice cracked on the last word. She hated that. "Then let's step out of the shadows," he said, pulling her gently toward him. "I've never done anything halfway with you. Not your ideas, not your insights, not this." And then slowly his lips found hers. It was tentative at first, as if asking permission. But the second she kissed him back, it deepened, warmth flooding in, two people finally saying everything they'd been too afraid to speak aloud. He held her like someone who wasn't used to softness, but had finally found it. And she melted into him, like someone who'd spent too long building walls, now ready to let someone in. But even in the warmth, the fear returned. Emily pulled back, breathless. What happens tomorrow? Nathan didn't have an answer. "Do I still mop floors while you draft press statements?" she asked. "Do I get quietly erased once this becomes inconvenient?" He opened his mouth but closed it again, unsure what truth would comfort her without betraying her reality. She stepped back. "I can't be a secret, Nathan. Not because I want the world to know, but because I need to know you won't forget." "I won't forget," he said, reaching for her hand again. "You changed me, Emily." "Then prove it," she whispered. "Don't just feel something in this room, carry it outside with you, into the light, into boardrooms, into policies, into how you speak about women who don't come with diplomas." He nodded, heart thundering. She wanted truth, not tenderness, courage, not compliments. And somewhere deep inside, he realized he loved her for it. She gathered her things quietly, the spell broken not because it wasn't real, but because reality was knocking. "Good night, Nathan," she said, walking toward the door. He didn't stop her, didn't call her back. He simply watched, knowing that if he didn't find the courage she deserved, soon he'd lose more than the woman. He'd lose the part of himself she'd awakened. That night, Emily sat on her fire escape. The city sprawled below her. Her son slept inside, unaware that his mother had just kissed a man who could rewrite her future or erase it. She thought about all the things she'd been for people: quiet, useful, forgettable. Nathan had seen something else. But seeing wasn't enough. She needed someone who would stand beside her when eyes turned. Someone who'd say, "This is the woman who saved my company," without flinching. Across the city, Nathan stood at his floor-to-ceiling window, looking out but seeing only her. His phone buzzed. Emails, meetings, responsibilities, but none of it felt as important as the fire he'd seen behind her eyes. Not passion, not rebellion, but integrity, unapologetic and unyielding. And in that moment, he knew he wasn't afraid of loving her. He was afraid of not being good enough to deserve her. And maybe, just maybe, that was where love began. The heat clung to Nathan's skin as he stepped out of his car, his eyes scanning the modest brick building nestled between a pawn shop and a daycare center with a faded mural of sunflowers. This wasn't his part of town. The pavement here bore cracks filled with weeds. The air smelled faintly of fried plantains, and every sign was handwritten, earnest, imperfect, alive. He adjusted the collar of his shirt, unsure if it was the heat or his nerves making him sweat. In his hand, a flyer Emily had dropped on his desk 3 days earlier, intentionally or not. Community Legal Workshop. Saturdays, 2 p.m. He didn't tell her he was coming. Part of him wasn't sure why he did. Inside the room was simple plastic folding chairs in uneven rows, children's drawings taped to the walls, and a dry erase board scrawled with words like tenant rights and eviction defense. The air conditioning hummed, and the scent of old carpet and instant coffee hung in the air. Nathan stood in the backhands and pockets, watching as people slowly filled the room. Teen mothers, elderly tenants, workers in paint-stained shirts, faces worn by time and systems they barely understood. And then she walked in. Emily, hair in a ponytail, jeans, flats, a plain t-shirt. No pretense, no authority, just presence. "Hi, everyone," she said, smiling as she moved to the front of the room. "We're going to talk about what your landlord hopes you never learn." Laughter rippled gently through the group. Nathan's chest tightened. She was electric without trying to be her language, simple metaphors, vivid her confidence, born not of theory, but of lived truth. "A lease is a two-way promise," she said, "not a leash. And you have rights even if no one ever bothered to tell you." She didn't teach law like it belonged in courtrooms. She taught it like it belonged at kitchen tables. A woman raised her hand, tears welling in her eyes. "They shut off my water after I complained about the mold." Emily walked over, knelt beside her. "That's retaliation. Illegal in this state." She didn't just recite statutes, she translated them into healing. Nathan watched, stunned. In his world, law was armor. In hers, it was a bridge. And for the first time in a long time, he questioned everything about how he'd been taught to wield it. After the workshop, people lingered. Emily handed out stapled guides she'd written herself. A young man asked about clearing a juvenile record. She gave him hope without sugarcoating. When the last family finally left, she turned and saw Nathan standing at the edge of the room like he was afraid to step too close. Their eyes met and something flickered, warmth, wariness, the remnants of an unfinished kiss. "You came," she said. "I wasn't sure you would." Nathan stepped forward. "I didn't come to check on you," he said. "I came to understand the woman I kissed and the world she walks through." She exhaled slowly, folding her arms. "And what did you see?" "Brilliance," he said. "Not the kind that's taught in law school. The kind that changes people. The kind I could never touch from my corner office." She tilted her head. "That brilliance comes with unpaid overtime, second jobs, and systems that forget you exist." "I want to remember you exist," he said. "Not just here. Everywhere. With me." She looked away, jaw tightening. "I don't need another man who's inspired by me at a distance. I need one who shows up and stays." Nathan stepped closer, no longer. The CEO, just a man trying to cross a line he didn't know existed until she drew it. "I was wrong to walk away after that kiss. I let fear dictate what I could have had, but I'm here now not to take but to learn." Her shoulders dropped. She wanted to believe him, but belief came slowly to those who've had to fight alone. "I don't need you to rescue me, Nathan," she said. "I just need you to stop pretending I need to be rescued in the first place. Then let me stand beside you," he whispered. "Not as your boss, not as someone who wants to fix you, but as someone who wants to earn the right to be near you." He reached out his hand, hovering. She looked at it, then at him, the conflict in her chest spilling into her eyes. "This world doesn't know where to place women like me," she said. "Not in courtrooms, not in headlines, not in hearts like yours." "Then let's build a place," he replied. "One step at a time, starting here." She took his hand. It wasn't a grand gesture. No music swelled, no one clapped. But for Emily, who had built walls taller than dreams, it was a beginning. "Okay," she said, "but I don't do grand entrances. I do quiet revolutions." "Perfect." He smiled. "I've spent too long in loud rooms with empty voices. I'm ready for something real." They didn't kiss, not yet, but the silence between them softened. In the distance, a child's laughter echoed from the hallway. Hope, after all, is never loud, it just stays. They walked out together side by side into the golden wash of late afternoon sun. Emily told him about her son's science fair project. He told her about his grandmother's bakery that went bankrupt because she didn't understand tax law. They spoke not as CEO and janitor, but as two people dismantling the space between them with every honest word. And as they turned down the street toward the nearest coffee cart, Nathan realized he wasn't walking away from anything. He was finally walking towards something worth holding on to. Monday morning at Blake and Rowe felt colder than usual. Not because of the weather, it was spring now, and sunlight was pouring down over the skyline, but because something had shifted. Nathan could feel it in the glances that lingered too long, in the unusually formal greetings from partners he'd known for years, and most of all, in the sealed manila envelope that waited on his desk like a verdict. He opened it slowly, heart already bracing. Inside was a typed memo, clinical and cold, regarding Emily Carter. Her continued presence poses reputational risks. We advise immediate severance of all ties. At the bottom, a dozen signatures, people who shook his hand last week, people who smiled at Emily in passing. He leaned back, memo in hand, staring out over the city he used to love. A city where success meant detachment, where power meant playing along. The board didn't care that Emily had saved 3 contracts this quarter. They didn't care that clients called to thank her, that law students across the country were quoting her TikToks like gospel. They cared about optics. She was to them a symbol of risk, a story they didn't know how to control. And now they wanted her erased. Quietly, of course. Respectfully, if possible. But erased all the same. Across town, Emily sat by a window in a cafe, her son beside her coloring dragons on a napkin. She hadn't seen Nathan since Saturday. She was giving him space to choose to retreat, to be the man he said he wanted to be. Her phone buzzed with messages from nonprofits, law school deans, even one from a senator's office. They wanted her to speak, to teach, to lead. But her heart wasn't on stages. It was with a man she wasn't sure had the courage to stand beside her in public. And she'd already spent too many years being someone's secret pride. Back at the firm, the partners were already in the conference room. The same room where Nathan had pitched multi-million-dollar ideas, closed impossible deals, charmed clients into believing in miracles. Today he walked in with the memo in his pocket and fire in his chest. The managing partner started to speak, but Nathan held up a hand. "Before we begin," he said, "I want to make something clear." He walked to the center of the room. "You're asking me to cut ties with the one person who's shown more brilliance, more moral clarity, and more strategic insight than half this board combined." Murmurs rippled through the room. Someone cleared their throat. Another shifted in their seat. Nathan continued, "You think her presence is a liability because she didn't come through the usual doors, because she's a janitor, a single mom, someone who didn't wait for your permission to be great." He paused, letting the words land. "But let me be very clear, without Emily Carter, this firm would have lost millions. More than that, we would have lost our soul." Silence followed, a silence heavy with unspoken truths. One of the senior partners spoke up. "It's not personal, Nathan. It's protocol. We can't have someone like her. Someone like her. Nathan, echoed voice rising. You mean someone without a title, someone with a conscience. He shook his head, eyes blazing. You're so terrified of her because she reminds you of everything you forgot this job was supposed to be about: justice, humanity. The kind of courage you can't bill by the hour. No one spoke. No one moved. And in that stillness, Nathan made his decision. If she goes, he said quietly, I go. The words dropped like thunder. A few gasped. Someone laughed nervously, but Nathan didn't waver. I built this firm with you. I bled for it. But I won't stand by while you erase the one person who reminded me why I became a lawyer in the first place. He walked out without waiting for a response. His footsteps echoed through the hallway like a drumbeat. He didn't know what would happen next. But for once, he wasn't afraid. That night, Emily was reading on the couch when the knock came. She opened the door, surprised to find Nathan standing there in the fading evening light, eyes soft but steady. You didn't call, she said. I was waiting to have something worth saying, he replied. So here it is. I chose you. She blinked. What does that mean? It means I told them no. I told them I won't be part of a world that can't see your worth. Emily's eyes filled not with tears, but with something deeper. Relief, reverence, love. He stepped closer, reaching for her hand. They asked me to let you go, but I couldn't. Because every time I think about the kind of legacy I want to leave, it looks a lot like you. Strong, honest, impossible to ignore. She squeezed his hand. I didn't ask you to fight for me. I know, he said. That's what made me want to. Then in the quiet of her doorway, with the city glowing behind them, they kissed, not with desperation, but with certainty. A kiss that said, this time I'm not afraid. In the weeks that followed, things changed. Nathan stepped back from his CEO role and co-founded a new legal initiative with Emily, one that offered pro bono services, trained young lawyers from underprivileged backgrounds, and redefined what it meant to serve the law. Their names appeared together in articles not as scandal, but as revolution. And every time someone asked how it started, Nathan would smile and say, she taught me everything I forgot. And then she reminded me who I wanted to become. The auditorium was packed, a sea of suits and summer dresses, the air humming with polite applause and murmurs of congratulations. The Future of Law Scholarship Gala was always a polished affair, sponsored by elite firms, attended by judges and politicians, a night built to celebrate pedigrees. But this year, the spotlight belonged to someone who had never once asked for it. Emily Carter stood backstage in a simple navy dress, her fingers trembling slightly as she held the program in her hand. Her name was printed there, not in the fine print, not in footnotes, but in bold. Keynote honoree, full scholarship recipient. Just 2 years ago, she was pushing a mop cart through those glass doors at Blake and Rowe, her law books tucked into her janitor closet. Tonight, she would walk on stage not as someone who cleaned floors, but as someone who helped redefine the floor plan. The scholarship wasn't just a gesture, it was a declaration. That intellect didn't need permission. That brilliance didn't require privilege. And yet, as she peeked through the curtain, scanning the crowd for a familiar face, her stomach flipped with nerves. Would he be here? Nathan had said he would come. He'd promised in the soft hush of their shared apartment that morning while she pinned her hair and he buttoned her zipper. You'll be incredible, he whispered, kissing the space behind her ear. I'll be the one clapping the loudest. But the ceremony had started, and he was nowhere to be seen. She tried not to let disappointment crack the confidence she had fought so hard to wear like armor. The MC was already introducing her, the crowd clapping, rising, expecting. She took a breath, steadied herself, and stepped into the light. The spotlight hit her face, but Emily didn't blink. She held the microphone in 2 hands like it was something sacred. 2 years ago, she began, I was invisible, not because I lacked ability, but because I didn't come wrapped in the right paper. The room quieted. Even the servers paused. I cleaned offices filled with people who never looked twice. Until one man did. Not out of pity, but because he saw something useful, something sharp. A few people turned their heads, scanning the crowd. and that changed everything. Not because he gave me a chance, but because he reminded me I didn't need permission to be extraordinary. Somewhere near the back of the hall, a door creaked open. Nathan slipped inside, crooked hair, tousled from running. His heart still racing. Traffic had stalled for 40 minutes, and then he spilled coffee on his shirt, but none of it mattered now. Because there she was. Standing under lights he knew she deserved. And as he eased into a seat near the aisle, her eyes finally found his. She smiled, not wide, not showy, but the kind of smile that said, "You made it." He nodded, and in that moment the room faded for both of them. This scholarship, Emily continued, isn't just a chance to finish what I started. It's proof. Proof that knowledge isn't tied to a degree, that value doesn't wear suits, that justice doesn't always come from above. It often rises from below. She looked around the room, voice strong now. And to every person who's ever been underestimated, who's ever been told to stay in their place, I see you. And I'm bringing a chair to the table for you. Thunderous applause erupted, but Emily stayed still, her chin lifted, her eyes damp. This wasn't about recognition. It was about reclaiming. After the speech, the crowd buzzed with admiration. She shook hands with professors, posed for photos with donors, answered questions from aspiring students. But she was searching, always searching, until she felt a hand touch the small of her back. She turned, and there he was. Nathan holding a single daisy, not roses, not lilies. Just the flower she'd once said reminded her of her mom's garden growing up. "You were extraordinary," he said. She smiled, resting her forehead against his. "I only said the truth." "That's what made it extraordinary," he whispered. They stepped out onto the balcony, the city skyline glittering behind them like a blessing. "Do you remember," Emily asked, "when I told you I didn't want to be someone's secret pride?" Nathan nodded. "You're not. You're my public revolution." She laughed, tears slipping freely now. "And you're mine." They kissed then, unhurried and sure. It wasn't the kind of kiss that demanded attention. It was the kind that sealed something quietly unbreakable. The kind that said, "We made it. Together." Months later, Emily started her first semester of law school with her name already known on campus. But she never stopped coming back to the community center. She never stopped returning to the neighborhood that first gave her a voice. Nathan helped expand the pro bono wing of their nonprofit, creating internships for students who, like Emily once was, were brilliant but unseen. And every night, after the last email was sent and the city finally slept, they curled into each other on their worn couch, a little boy sleeping down the hall, and talked about the future, not in plans, but in possibilities. And when people asked them years later how it all began, how a janitor became a lawyer, how a CEO became an ally, how love grew not from ease, but from courage, they'd look at each other and smile. It began, Emily would say, with being seen. And it lasted, Nathan would add, because we chose each other. Again and again. In rooms that weren't made for us, in systems that tried to divide us. We didn't just fall in love. We rebuilt the world a little differently, one truth at a time. Emily took her first step into the courthouse with a deep inhale, fine limestone columns rising overhead. Courtroom doors polished to a dull reflection. She no longer carried a mop cart, but a sleek leather satchel and a freshly pressed navy blazer. Her badge identified her as associate counsel at Blake & Rowe. Yet even with the official title, she felt every gaze from clerks and defense attorneys to bailiffs and judges. They had heard the story that of a janitor who became a legal scholar, a viral sensation turned law clerk, and not all of them were ready to make room for someone like her. Some watched with curiosity, others with thinly veiled doubt. Emily pressed a hand to her collar and swallowed hard, willing herself to belong. That morning before sunrise, the couple had shared a quiet moment in their shared apartment. Scratchy sheets, the soft hum of the city beneath them. Nathan kissed her temple and whispered, "Their stares will fade when they see you, Emily. Excellence doesn't wait to be invited." She squeezed his hand and nodded, though in the hallway shadows restreamed her nerves. As she walked through the courthouse lobby, polished wood floors and echoing steps felt strange, but she leaned into it, one foot forward and foot, one heartbeat at a time. Her first assignment came via email, a procedural brief for a civil motion involving housing rights. She sat at a conference table with litigators and senior clerks looking over her shoulder. When she handed in the finished draft before the deadline, the supervising attorney paused, and said, "Did you write this yourself?" Emily met his eyes. "I did." He flipped through the pages. "This is unexpected. Well argued. Insightful. Not brilliant or exceptional, just unexpected. Enough to prove a point. Enough to remind her that brilliance doesn't fit neatly in any box, especially not one designed by doubt." That evening, she returned home exhausted, the lines of the courtroom still faintly present on her fingertips. Nathan greeted her in the kitchen, the comforting sense of roasted vegetables and pan-seared salmon filling the air. They ate by candlelight, the table quiet except for the clink of silverware. Emily smiled tightly. "I keep thinking once they give me a title, they'll stop seeing everything else I've been." Nathan slid a hand across the table and caught hers. "They'll see you. But if they never stop seeing the rest, it's still a win." She exhaled a single laugh, lost in relief, and leaned her head against his shoulder. Over the next several months, Emily didn't just survive, she thrived. Her briefs grew sharper, her research deeper. Clients started asking for her by name. Junior attorneys looked to her for clarity. Yet as her star rose, the resistance became more subtle. Meetings that should have included her were scheduled elsewhere. Ideas she voiced were credited to others. One senior associate called her Nathan Blake's charity project within earshot of a few colleagues. She heard him a comment whispered in an empty hallway, but she chose silence. Not from fear, but from resolve. If she proved anything, she wouldn't let others derail her momentum. One late afternoon, she arrived home early, cheeks flushed with strain and frustration. Nathan wrapped his arms around her before words arrived. She leaned into him, admitting, "They expect me to break. They want me to break." His voice was steady. "Then break them. With your work. With your truth." She nodded, feeling the fracture in her confidence begin to heal, not because she believed them, but because she believed in herself and him. The turning point came in a high-stakes boardroom meeting. Emily presented a proposal for expanding pro bono services to low-income tenants. As she spoke, she traced data and real stories, women who'd lost apartments unfairly, undocumented workers denied representation. Halfway through, a senior partner interrupted. "We appreciate your passion, Ms. Carter, but perhaps you'd be more effective working on cases that better suit your background." Emily paused. She put a palm flat on the table and said firmly, "Justice isn't bound by background. It's bound by need." Her voice hit the room like a gavel. Nathan smiled, but the energy shifted. The partners looked at each other. One by one, nods followed. After the meeting, she found Nathan in the hallway by the elevators just in time. He wrapped an arm around her. "You didn't have to say that." "Yes, I did," she replied, voice steady. "It wasn't charity, it was equity." He nodded. "You just redefined it for them, for us. You just changed the way we think about this firm." She let him pull her close, grounding her after the tension. Now, he murmured, "Let's keep changing it. Together." 2 semesters later, Emily graduated with her JD cum laude. She was offered an associate counsel position on the spot with a mandate to continue her community outreach program and mentor rising law students from non-traditional backgrounds. She accepted on her terms, her name on every paper, her projects public, her heart anchored to her truth. That evening, she and Nathan walked through their neighborhood streetlights, illuminating their path. "We made it," he said. "No," she corrected, "we carried it." The next morning, they stepped into the same grand courthouse where she had begun. The limestone floors now felt familiar. Emily stood beside Nathan, her hand in his, her suit sharp, her badge shining. Reporters snapped photos. Colleagues nodded in respect. In that moment, they weren't just a couple. They were a symbol of what happens when love meets conviction and courage becomes action. She leaned on him, and he squeezed back. Because she had fought to belong not for herself alone, but for every story that looked like hers. And he had refused to let anyone take her light away. Together they walked into their future, unafraid, undefeated, and utterly in love. The day of the wedding arrived not with grand fanfare, but with the quiet kind of magic only true beginnings carry. The community center was transformed with soft fairy lights, folding chairs dressed in white ribbon, and mason jars filled with daisies and baby's breath. There was no cathedral, no designer gowns or five-course meals, just family friends, and the people who had once come to Emily's free legal clinics with questions in their eyes and hope in their hands. Emily stood in the modest changing room, smoothing the fabric of her simple ivory dress. Her son sitting on a bench behind her, clutching a ring box, with hands too small to hold the gravity of the moment. "You ready, Mama?" he asked, his tie slightly crooked, his eyes shining with pride. Emily knelt beside him, kissed his forehead. "I've never been more ready," she whispered. And she meant it. Not just for the wedding. For all of it, the future, the risks, the sacred unknown. Her hands didn't shake. Her heart didn't race. This wasn't a fairy tale. It was a hard-earned love story. The kind that's written through long nights, legal briefs, silence filled with understanding, and 1,000 small moments of choosing each other over and over again. Outside, Nathan stood at the end of the aisle, adjusting his cufflink, not because it was loose, but because his hands needed something to do. When he first met Emily, he couldn't have imagined this. Not her in white, not her in his arms, not the way she had carved out a place in his world and then asked him to meet her halfway. And he had. Every step, every decision. Now, as the music played, nothing more than a violin played by a teenager from the neighborhood, they locked eyes across the makeshift aisle and the air between them tightened with unspoken vows. The ceremony was short, simple, and completely theirs. There were no rehearsed readings, no champagne flutes waiting to clink. Just a justice of the peace with a voice like sandpaper. Emily's son beaming as he handed over the rings, and a room full of people who knew the real power of a commitment not made in grand gestures, but in the way Nathan always waited up when Emily studied late, and the way she whispered his name like it was safe ground. When they said "I do," there were no dry eyes, not even from the boardroom lawyers who once doubted her place at their table. At the reception, someone handed Emily a mic and asked her to speak. She hesitated, then stepped forward. The lights caught in her curls, her eyes, and in the ring now sparkling on her finger. "I used to think love meant finding someone who would lift you out of your world," she said. "But I've learned that the real kind, the rare kind, meets you exactly where you are and builds something new with you." She turned to Nathan. "You didn't save me. You saw me, and that made all the difference." That night, long after the chairs were folded and the lights dimmed, they lay on the rooftop of their apartment, still dressed in wedding clothes, their fingers entwined. The city hummed below like a lullaby. "I don't know what kind of lawyers we'll become," Emily said. "I don't know if we'll change the world." Nathan kissed her knuckles. "But we'll try, and we'll do it together." She smiled. "That's the only part I'm sure of." In the hush of that rooftop, it was clear they weren't chasing perfection. They were building a life with room for failure, softness, and starting again. Months later, Emily stood in front of a classroom at the very law school she once couldn't afford to attend, now a guest lecturer. Her son sat in the back row, doodling superheroes in the margin of her notes. "I'm not here because I had all the right credentials," she told the students. "I'm here because I refused to let circumstances define my capacity. And because I had someone who didn't try to fix me, he believed in me enough to walk beside me." Nathan, standing in the doorway, caught her eye. He didn't smile big, just enough. Together, they opened a legal clinic that merged community aid with high-impact litigation. It was messy, emotional, and never quite enough, but it mattered. They wrote policies, argued in court, cried with families. They fought. They made up. They kept going. Their office was filled with old furniture, chalk drawings from her son, and a picture on the wall, Emily in her wedding dress, Nathan in his rolled-up sleeves, both laughing. It wasn't just a photo. It was a manifesto. Real love builds, and real change comes from those who've lived the fight. Years later, when people asked how they made it work, law, love, parenthood, pressure, they'd answer the same way every time. "We didn't fall in love." Emily would say, "We rose into it." And Nathan would add, "Because we built it. One hard day at a time. One soft evening at a time. We learned not to be afraid of each other's dreams." And maybe that was the secret. They didn't compete for space. They created it for each other. They didn't try to escape who they were. They embraced it, refined it, and loved louder because of it. And now, dear reader, what about you? What dreams have you silenced because you thought you didn't belong in the room? What part of your story have you hidden because someone said it wasn't impressive enough? Emily's journey wasn't perfect. It was raw, uncertain, and earned in sweat and soul. But it was hers. And maybe, just maybe, it's time for yours to begin too. Not when you feel ready. Not when someone gives you permission. But now. Because the world doesn't need more polished lives. It needs more stories like yours, messy, brave, and deeply unapologetically human.